Well, today I'll be talking about what blockchain is. I'll be introducing how it's currently used, how this early technology is currently being used, with except gambling and drug dealing, and among those use cases, I'll go into two of them and tell you how the technology is being used. So let me start with what a blockchain is. The definition of a blockchain by the smart people at the Harvard Business Review says an open distributed ledger that can record transactions between two parties efficiently and in a verifiable and a permanent way. So to put this in plain English, does anybody know what a ledger is? Who can tell me what a ledger is? Records, right? So a ledger is just a simple sum of records. It's a book. It's a record-keeping book. And surprisingly, these records are very powerful in our society. We don't know it, we don't really feel it, but actually the people who controls these books, these ledgers, control our lives. So let's, for example, see banks. The beginning of a bank was a record-keeping entity. There are a lot of historical theories about how banks started, but one of the promising ones, or one of the most major ones, is that they started back in Italy when the Renaissance came. I think it was the Medici family. They were taking care of the Pope's wealth, and they were doing currency trading, because on the Renaissance age there were tradings between a lot of fiat currencies, and they traded these currencies and they received the spread, the fees from them, and they earned a fortune by keeping records, by being a trustworthy person who can keep our wealth, put it on the book, and then trade that. So the banks have evolved, and when we do like a Kakao Pay, or we send our money, we send when our parents send you guys your like tuitions, they all go through banks. And what we do is we trust the banks, so we give the money to the bank, and we look at the bank's records. We look at the bank's ledger and see how much money we have, how much we have sent, and they control our wealth. And also, supply chain, being all the systems now is basically a database, is a book of records. So the databases are ledgers. The supply chain is a ledger technology. Facebook, our social media, is a ledger technology. So the central authority that controls the ledger is basically controlling our lives, controlling our finances, controlling our social lives, controlling where our packages are coming. And there were problems. As you all know, the 2008, 2009, the financial crisis came. The banks who were keeping our books and our wealth were not very honest with us, because for them, they had temptations. They had temptations to cheat. They had temptations to falter the ledger. Their incentives to keep the ledger honestly was lesser than to false the ledger so they can gain the profits from it. So trusting a central authority became a big problem. And there are people saying, how can we get rid of this? How can we get rid of the central authority and put it in a decentralized way? So this is how blockchain came up. It started with money. So that's why a lot of people, the first ever application of blockchain is the Bitcoin, transferring value, transferring money through this network. And basically, in this way, you all have a ledger. So simply, it's a bank statement. You see a bank statement, You put it in. Everyone has a magical notebook in the blockchain world. So when you put down Alice sends Bob like $2, it'll appear if you write down on your notebook with your authority, with the right amount of authority, it'll magically show up on everyone else's ledger. That's without any. In this central authority, you tell the central person, you tell the middleman, Alice will send Bob $2, and the middleman will record that and will distribute it to all the people who have the ledgers. In a decentralized way, you have to somehow find out a way where you can write on your notebook and then it'll magically disperse to all the others who have those notebooks. So in order to do this, they had to solve two things. The problems they came up with that, how will you identify the person who will be recording that transaction? So let's say Bob will give Alice $2, and how can Bob be assured that Alice has sent the transaction? So that was how the identity of the counterparty was one. And the second one was double spending. So let's say I wrote on my notebook, and then because it's in the internet and because of network latencies, it takes time to disperse that transaction. So in the Bitcoin world, it takes 10 minutes. So if I walk into a Starbucks and then I order a cup of coffee, I pay with Bitcoin. And it takes 10 minutes for that Bitcoin to go from my ledger to show up on his ledger. So within that 10 minutes, if I have 5 Bitcoins and then I pay 3 Bitcoins for a cup of coffee, and before the ledger is gone, or the ledger is recorded, I go to the next door at McDonald's and then order a Big Mac set, and then maybe that will cost 4 Bitcoins. And then even though I have 5 Bitcoins, I can spend 3 or 4 Bitcoins, that's a total of 7. So this is called the double spending problem. Double spending problem occurs because you cannot make sure what the order of the transactions are. If you have a central authority, the one that goes to the middleman first is recorded. So you don't have to worry about the order, it's all coming to the same. However, in a decentralized world, if you record something and then it takes time for it to be propagated to the network. So within that time, you have a chance, an open window to do the double spending. So they had to solve the double spending problem, which is they had to decide the order of the transactions that are coming up. So this was the two main problems they had to solve. And then the solutions were, one was digital signatures. I'm not going to be going really deep about this because it's going to be too advanced. But if you want to understand the basic of it, there's a YouTube video in Khan Academy. You can search for public cryptography, and you will see how a digital signature can really signify a person, you are a person that you claim to be without revealing your identity. So this digital signature has been really long, the history is long. It has been used in World War II when the transmissions were eavesdropped by the spies, and you have to, cryptography was a really big thing then. So it evolved from the World War II. So the identity was solved, but deciding the order of the transactions was a big problem. And then a person or a group of persons, a group of people that claim to be Satoshi Nakamoto have wrote this white paper and said, hey, I've solved the double spending problem. Now we can decide the order of the transactions without having a middleman. So we can all reach a consensus. We can all agree on one state of an order of transactions. So that's called the Nakamoto consensus. This is easily put, it's incentivizing people to keep things honest. So It's not a very technology thing. It's solving a technology problem in an economic way. So this, again, I will not go really deep. So, but it'll be okay for you guys to understand. So these were solved. The identity and the order of transactions were solved, and now we have a ledger that does not have a middle authority, does not have a central authority that has to keep the ledgers. So people started recording all the things in this decentralized ledger. They put money in there, and that was the Bitcoin. And some people put how the diamonds were moved from South Africa to how it was mined, how it was moved, and how it was decorated. And they wrote all that on the ledger. Sometimes someone puts the ownership of a art piece on the ledger. So who owns what % of this art piece? So back ago, this was too little, and there was too little incentive to put the ownership, to keep the record of the ownership of the art piece. However, with the decentralized ledger, it is now cheap enough to do that. And now and also I've talked about the supply chain, and Walmart is doing a project with IBM to record how the food is moving from farm to the vendor on the Walmart stand. So the movement of the onions are recorded on the ledger. So these can be all recorded on the blockchain. The supply chain and the land registry, who owns what land, and even now online casinos are coming up on the ledger. And well, the blockchain has two main features, and that is this disintermediation and incentivizing goodwill. So disintermediation, as I've said, because they have got rid of the central authority, a lot of cost is being scraped out. You don't have the operation costs, you don't have the audit costs. So other than the systematic costs, there are a lot of costs that's being swiped out. So many people, people who couldn't access that service for, say, the bank service or the ownership of the art service, has been able to access that service because the blockchain reduces cost of keeping that platform. And also, because the blockchain is a protocol and it doesn't have any incentives, unlike those banks during the financial crisis, they have a very stable and fair system. And then in these blockchains, these are programmable. So now we can incentivize goodwill, incentivize people to do something for, say, protect the environment, instead of punishing them if they don't. So before, the vast majority of incentivizing and letting people to do good things, for example, recycling or keeping the environment, they had to punish those who don't keep the law. However, now it is possible to incentivize people who keep the goodwill, for people who keep their, they walk into a Starbucks and they have a recycled bottle or something, and if they do something that'll do better for the environment, they will be incentivized with tokens. So that's how, because this is possible, it's much better to form a platform. I'll talk about this later during the lecture. So as I've said, this is the long tail effect. And beforehand, the blue line was the break-even point. So the banks don't serve the people that are below the break-even point because it doesn't make economical sense to them. However, because of the blockchain now providing these services, the cost has been reduced. So these people on the bottom end can receive service. So blockchain opens up new markets, and this is why people are so crazy about it. There are new opportunities coming up and new markets opening up. So what blockchain is good for is the storage of value and transferring value. I'll be just touching lightly on some of the examples that we can give. And one of the things that blockchain does is what the internet does to information. Before internet came, sending a message to people on the opposite side of the globe took a lot of effort. You have to go through postmail, you have to go through either airmail. But now with internet, you can just do it on a fast and a cheaper way. That's what the blockchain does for value. So you can, with a Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, you can send the money over to a person who is very, very far in a very cheap and affordable way. So one of the sustainable goals of the United Nations, I think is goal 10, is to reduce global remittance fees. Currently right now is average of 7%, and the target is 3% and no over 5%. And blockchain is a really key tool to solving that. So the UN is looking closely to it. And it's really good for automating the middleman. For example, this is a project by Bext, and what they do is they make a coffee. The coffee beans are poured into those machines, and they are the AI decides the quality of the beans, and they pay the machine pays them on the spot on their smartphones. So with this, you can cut the cost of the coffee bean brokers, and give value to the producers and also the consumers on the end side. Well, this is a picture of when I was in New York. There's a big conference called the Consensus, and IBM is really big on blockchain. And one of the booths they said is the Twig Foods, and what Twig Foods does is they supply these fruits for the street vendors, the kiosks in Kenya, in Nairobi. So what they were looking into is that the people who run those kiosks, the kiosk owners, they don't have the working capital to buy enough supply, even though the demand is there. So what they wanted to do is launch a microfinancing platform. If we let these kiosk owners to lend a small amount of money, they'll be able to buy more food, and they'll be able to sell more fruits and gain more profit. And Twig Foods also wins because they get to provide more fruit. So they came up with a micro-lending platform with machine learning. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Kenya's M-Pesa platform. So the kiosk owners, small, medium enterprises, they all have records of credit and finance. So with that, they do the machine learning, and they get out the credibility to lend a small amount of money to these owners. What problem was that it took too much administrative cost for the banks on the back side. So the banks had to make sure that the amount of loans were transferred to the owners, and there were too many paperwork in the middle. That's where blockchain came up. Blockchain made them possible to aggregate all the records in the same platform. And then because of the smart contracts, they could reduce a lot of the paperwork. So a lot of administrative costs were cut down, and they were able to do these small amount of lendings. And during this pilot, there were 220 kiosks that were in the pilot program, and during the 8 weeks, more than 220 loans were sent out. The average loan was about $30, a very small amount of money, and it took about 4 to 8 days to pay back with the interest of 1 to 2%. And the results, 30% increase in order size, a win for Twig Foods, and also 6% increase in profit for the kiosk owners. So a win for the kiosk owners too. And another program that I would like to introduce you to is the building blocks that was carried out by the UN World Food Program. They're fighting zero hunger, and they built this program on a refugee camp in Jordan. So what the World Food Program do, they hand out vouchers. They don't. They not only hand out food to those people who need it, but they hand out vouchers so that they can use it in the local markets. So they don't disrupt the market in the country. And in order to hand out these vouchers, either they be bank cards or mobile money, they need financial intermediaries. It's the banks or the telecommunication companies. And what the financial intermediaries do, they do accounting, they create accounts, and then they distribute the cards or the SIM cards, and they authorize transactions. When the people go to the markets and then they swipe the cards, they have to make sure they have enough balance to pay for the amount they bought. And then they do the reporting. They gather all the reporting, the monthly reports, the weekly reports to the World Food Program. And that all goes to the accounting part. And they take care of the payment. So this is the basic, the flow of how things went in the legacy system. See here, the I stands for information. So the World Food Program has a list of the beneficiaries and hands it over to the bank. And the bank creates accounts for them. And then they make those cards and hand it out to the beneficiaries and tells them, you can now use these cards to the store and to buy food. So the beneficiaries, the World Food Program has to pay in advance so the banks can do the payments to the stores. So there's information and money that's going in there. The beneficiaries go to the store and then they swipe the cards. The store asks the bank if this person has enough balance. The bank authorizes the transaction, and the beneficiary walks out with the food, and the bank pays the store on a weekly or a monthly basis. And the banks reports to the World Food Program how much money were used, how many people have received the service. Some of the issues that they have is the cost. There's a lot of administrative cost that's going into the middleman, and there's a risk. There's a financial risk because there's an advance payment, and this bank can be corrupted or maybe unstable, going bankruptcy. There's a risk of financial risk. Privacy, because this was run on a refugee camp, there are a lot of hostile governments that can be a potential threat to the refugees. And handing over the personal information of the refugees to the bank was a big privacy issue. Reconciliation, the bank gives the reports to the World Food Program. No one knows 100% sure if this is right or wrong. And control speed, flexibility. I'll skip these issues because we're running a bit out of time. So with the blockchain, the World Food Program replaced that middleman with the blockchain. And in the World Food Program, they record, in the refugee camps, they have retina scans in the supermarkets. So when the beneficiary comes, they just register them, they scan their retina and register them on the blockchain. And if they charge up that balance with that person on the blockchain, the beneficiary is informed, and he or she can go to the store, buy some foods, and then scan his or her retina, and then the store will go to the blockchain and see how much balance this beneficiary has, and then the blockchain authorizes the payment, and the World Food Program pays the store directly. So this started last year in May. There were 10,000 beneficiaries that went through this program. About $1.6 million were distributed. 200,000 transactions were made, and there wasn't any accidents or issues. There was a 98% fee reduction getting rid of the banks. No information, no privacy issues were here because the information does not go out to a third party. No funds in advance, so there's no financial risk. And the World Food Program has full control, and it's faster for the beneficiary to receive that voucher. Also, it has interoperability issues. It has flexibility, because before, if Bob wants to go to the World Food Program, and then he can go to the UNHCR and maybe the WHO, it has different agencies. Different agencies have different systems and different middlemen. So Bob has to register to agency number 1, 2, and 3 and go on. With the blockchain, you can just store all the information in a single source of truth, and the agencies can all refer to that source. So it'll be once you go, whether it's WHO or whether it's WFP, you can just register it in one place. You can receive the service for all of them. And also, that was how the World Food Program went. They're expanding because vaccinations and medical records are very important ones for refugees too. So they're expanding their source of information to many other agencies now. And as we said, the blockchain is really good for record management. So it could be a transaction record of your bank account and vaccines and medications of the people who get vaccinated. And also in America, there are credential fraud. Like if you can fraud your resumes and CVs. So that's a very big issue. And if you put it on the blockchain, you can reduce those fraud. And there are people who, in MIT and some of the colleges, they are putting their alumni records or certificate of graduations on the blockchain so the people can use it. So one last thing I want to mention is that digital identity is one of the key things that blockchain can solve. I guess you remember, I think it was last year when the Equifax, there was a leak on personal information about 1.5, I think it was 15 million people that was in, their personal information was leaked. And the world was going crazy over it. But on the other side of the globe, there are 10 billion people who doesn't have any records at all. They're not registered to the government, they're invisible. So as I said, the UN, I think I raised that slide, the UN Sustainable Development Goal on Goal 17, it says to give legal identity to all the people by 2030. That's one of the UN's SDG goals. So digital identity is a big thing. And they think blockchain is one of the keys that can solve this problem. So World Identity Network and ID 2020s are alliances that are trying to solve this problem. So I have a reference slide. You can check out all the information if you're interested. And I think some of the key takeaways for today is that blockchain is a useful tool to handle micropayments across the globe. So if you are trying to do a startup or a small medium enterprise, when you're trying to go global, payment is really a pain in the ass. It's the fees and the foreign currency trading fees. It's going to be gobbling up 30% of your revenue. With the blockchain, the micropayments will be much easier. And also, it can track and manage records easily. So if you have a lot of people, or if you have different databases, different shareholders sharing their databases, if you have to aggregate that, blockchain is one of the options that you can consider because you can do it in a much more efficient, I wouldn't say efficient, but in a more effective way. And also, if you want to build an ecosystem and incentivize participants, blockchain is also a good tool. I think you may have heard about how Airbnb wanted to give their shares to the homeowners because they think Airbnb, the whole platform, was the users, the participants of the ecosystem is actually what makes Airbnb so valuable. They want to incentivize them with their shares. So with blockchain, tokens will make it much more easier to do that. So if you want to do a startup or if you want to start your own service, blockchain can help you in these parts. So study about it. There are some of the references, some YouTube channels or the reports of the things that I mentioned briefly in this lecture. So you can take maybe these slides will be spread out and you can check it out later. So, well, thank you very much. I think that's all for I have prepared today.